The minimum wage has been a cornerstone of the labour market for over a century. But did you know the idea of regulated wages goes back thousands of years? Today, we'll explore the fascinating history of the minimum wage, from its ancient origins to the major milestones that shaped the workers' protection as we know it today. The concept of setting standard wages dates back thousands of years, long before any modern labour laws. One of the earliest examples of this was the ancient Babylonians around about 1750 BCE. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest known legal codes, included specific wage regulations. For example, field labourers were to be paid 8 gur of corn per year, while skilled tradespeople like carpenters and rope makers earned 4 grains of silver per day. In ancient Greece, while there wasn't a formal minimum wage, there were indications of wage standardization. Workers were often classified by income levels. For example, the lowest classes in Athens, known as the thetes, consisted of earning less than 200 medimnoi, a unit used to measure grain. Though many workers were paid in food rather than money, this classification suggests an early attempt to regulate economic fairness. The Roman Empire had its own version of wage control. Labourers in the cities like Pompeii earned around 8 asses, or half a denarius. 8 asses, yeah, that's what it is. Skilled miners in rural areas earned slightly more and often received free room and board as part of their compensation. Later, in 301 CE, Emperor Diocletian issued his famous edict of maximum prices. While this law set wage caps rather than minimums, it established a standardized pay rate for various professions, ranging from herdsmen and mule drivers to painters and lawyers. During the Middle Ages, wage control took a very different form. Because the Black Death had decimated much of Europe, it led to a vast labor crisis, and governments at the time responded by introducing a wage cap as well. The Statute of Labourers in 1351 was passed under Edward III, making it illegal to pay workers more than the pre-plague wages. This law aimed to keep them artificially low so people could actually afford to employ people. Despite the laws, the economic reality meant that wages increased over time, as they always do, and workers actually had quite a lot of bargaining power with the feudal lords, and they were forced to actually give better working conditions to retain the labourers. Then we fast forward all the way to the late 19th century, where actual modern minimum wage laws began to emerge. The Industrial Revolution brought about widespread exploitation, with sweatshops employing women and children at substantial wages. This sparked a movement of fair labour practices. The first modern minimum wage was actually introduced in New Zealand in 1894 as part of its Industrial Conciliation and Abbreviations Act. This was followed by Australia's state of Victoria in 1896, which established a wage board to set minimum pay rates for specific interests plagued by poor working conditions. Over the pond in the US, Massachusetts became the first state to pass minimum wage legislation in 1912, initially focused on protecting women and children in industries with exploitative practices. These laws will lay the groundwork for broader reforms later on. The early 1900s saw growing support for minimum wage across industrialized nations. The United Kingdom established trade boards to set minimum wage in certain industries where exploitation was also rampant. Winston Churchill, then a younger politician, championed these efforts. He famously argued that it was a serious national evil that any class of His Majesty's subjects should receive less than a living wage in return for their utmost exertions. Meanwhile, in the US, labor unions and social reformers pushed for more similar measures. Samuel Gompers, president of the American Federation of Laborers, advocated for what he called a minimum living wage as early as 1898. These efforts culminated in state-level legislation before federal policies took shape. The Great Depression then brought renewed focus on worker protection as unemployment soared and wages plummeted. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the National Industrial Recovery Act, which included provisions for federal minimum wage. However, this law was struck down by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional. Undeterred though, Roosevelt pressed forward with a New Deal agenda. In 1938, he signed the Fair Labor Act, which established a lasting federal minimum wage as 25 cents per hour, equivalent to about $5.58 today when adjusted for inflation. The FLSA also introduced another critical protection like overtime pay and restriction of child labor. Post-war era saw the introduction of the Wage Councils Act of 1945 in the UK, which expanded sectoral minimum wages. These councils protected about 2.5 million low-paid workers across various industries. However, they were gradually dismantled until the final 26 pages council was abolished in 1993. A significant milestone in the UK labour law came in with the National Minimum Wage Act in 1998. It was introduced by the Labour government at the time. This act established a national minimum wage across the United Kingdom, which came into effect on the 1st of April 1999. As of the 1st of April 2024, the minimum rate in the UK are £11.44 per hour for people over 21, £8.60 for people 18 to 20, and £6.40 for 16 to 17 and apprentices. In 2016, the government introduced the national living wage, initially for workers aged 25 and over. This was set at a higher rate than the existing minimum wage, with the aim of reaching 60% of the median earnings by 2020. More recently though, in November 2023, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt also announced that the national living wage would be extended to all workers over 21 as of April 24. This change represents a significant increase and expansion of the coverage for younger workers. In the US, the federal minimum wage has remained at $7.25 per hour since 2009. However, many states have enacted higher local minimum wages, and some pushing for $15 an hour standard. The UK continues to debate and adjust its minimum wage policies. The Low Pay Commission, established in 1993, plays a critical role in advising the government of minimum wage rates. Ongoing discussions focus on the balance for fair pay and the potential impacts on smaller businesses. The government has increased employer national insurance discounts for smaller employers to help offset the cost of higher minimum wages, and globally, countries like New Zealand and Australia continue to adjust their minimum wage annually based on inflation, the cost of living metrics. Meanwhile, debates persist over whether raising minimum wage helps reduce poverty or risks increasing unemployment. The history of the minimum wage is deeply intertwined with humanity's pursuit for fairness and dignity of work. Both the UK, the US, and the rest of the world navigate economic challenges and recovery from the COVID pandemic and now more modern issues. Ensuring fair pay remains a central challenge and opportunity for societies everywhere. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and thanks so much for watching.